Well, welcome back to my channel. My name is Claire. Today we're talking about essential sewing items or tools that you need in order to get started. So if you're brand new to sewing, maybe you haven't picked up your sewing machine just yet, or you're a beginner and you've done one or two garments, then this video is really gonna help you out. If you've been sewing for any length of time, then perhaps this video will serve as some inspiration for you. Perhaps you want to reset and go back to basics, because let's face it, once we've been sewing for any length of time, our buying habits can get out of control. So when I first started to sew, I was buying all the things, the fabric here, the sewing machines there, and it mounted up before my very eyes. Now, if I could change one thing about when I first learned to sew, it would be that I did not buy quite as much. I do have a video on the dumbest sewing purchases that I have made, so do check that video out if you're interested. There will be a link down below. Let me know down in the comments how much you think it costs to get the essentials and start to sew. If you're going to the budget end, which I am in this video, and I'll let you know my thoughts about how expensive I think it will be at the end. So do stay tuned for that. So the first thing you're going to need, and it's going to be the most expensive thing potentially that you will need to invest in, and that is a sewing machine. Now, a sewing machine can cost nothing if you borrow one from a friend or relative, and I really would encourage you to do that in the beginning, because if you're wanting to sew but you don't know if you're going to stick at it, then buying a sewing machine can be a bit of an investment. So in the first instance, I would really recommend that you borrow a sewing machine. But if there is no one to borrow from, or for whatever reasons you don't want to do that, you can buy sewing machines really cheap. I've spoken on this channel before about my first sewing machine, which was an IKEA sewing machine that cost me £45, I think, so about $50. It's designed for alterations and things like that, so it's going to give you that start, and it certainly gave me a start and helped me to see that I really want to give sewing a go before I then went on and bought a more expensive machine. And talking of cheap machines, I've just purchased this for the purposes of doing a review video, which is going to come soon. Let me know if you want to see a review of this. But this cost me £22, which is about $25, maybe a little bit more. So not expensive at all. This is kind of the cheapest you're going to get an actual sewing machine for. And this is a little tiny one. So I will do a review and tell you what I think of this, whether it's worth purchasing. So I won't go into that now. But you can buy them for like $25, $30, or maybe even cheaper if you look to go second hand as well. So that is always an option. I've owned sewing machines at all ends of the financial spectrum, from £45 IKEA through to £1,000 Brother sewing machine. I can tell you it is not essential to have an expensive sewing machine. The main thing an expensive sewing machine gives you is more stitches, and hardly anyone uses more stitches. It is a more luxurious experience when you are sewing on a more expensive machine. It tends to have less problems. However, some people have reported that cheap sewing machines have worked wonders for them. Do not feel under any pressure whatsoever to buy an expensive sewing machine. So the next tool I think you need is some thread. Thread is one of those things you can buy super cheap or super expensive. Now, I wouldn't recommend going cheap. I mean, if you go into your dollar store, or here our Poundland store, you can buy super cheap thread, and that is not going to work at all, because it will come apart, it's not very strong, and your garment won't withstand going into the washing machine. So these are called Coats Moon threads. I don't know if they're the same in the USA, and you get 1,000 yards on this for £1 or $1. So that is a really, really good value for money, and I like to invest in lots of colours. But honestly, you need maybe a black, a white and a grey, and you'll be as good as gold to go on any colour garment that you're ever going to make. The next thing you're going to need is needles. So these are just universal needles. So when you learn to sew, you're going to need to use different needles for different types of sewing, for different types of fabric. If you're using quilting cottons, you will probably just get away with a universal needle like I've got here. But if you want to sew knits, you'll need a ballpoint or a jersey needle. If you want to sew heavyweight fabrics such as denim, you're going to need a jeans needle for that. But generally speaking, you can get away with those 3 types of needle, as long as when you get your universal ones, you get a wide range of sizes. I sewed with the cheap ones for a long time. I was buying them in the pound shop or the dollar shop. I never had any real issues with them. I have now gone over to the more expensive brand, Schmidt's, I like to use. Not for any real reason, really. I've just been sewing a long time and I decided I wanted to upgrade a little bit. So that's what I do, but these will last me for a long time. One thing that the more expensive needles have on them is they're colour coded, and that will help you distinguish the size that you're using. If you sew a project and then don't come back to your machine for a couple of weeks, then you'll know what needle you've got in your machine. That's if you buy the more expensive needles. The cheap needles don't come with that, but if you're just starting out and you are learning to sew or deciding whether you want to even sew, then I recommend just getting the cheap needles. There is nothing wrong with that as far as I've ever known. So the next sewing item that you need is some fabric. So I've got these gorgeous fabrics here. Yes, I still haven't sewn them up yet, but they are coming very soon, I promise you. So you're going to need some fabric, because obviously if you're making clothes, you can't make anything out of thin air, can you? If you can, if you've ever made a dress out of thin air, do leave me a comment down below and let me know. I'd be very interested to know that. But for most of us, we cannot sew with thin air. Don't do what I buy and just buy fabrics because they're gorgeous. Buy fabrics because you need them. And we're talking budget fabrics today. I've bought, these days I don't buy budget fabrics. I have bought them for many years. In fact, I only recently stopped buying them, maybe less than a year ago. I would buy fabrics that cost £1 a metre, and you don't get any better than that in terms of prices. So if you're just starting out, that will be absolutely fine. You might remember my brown top that's like a cow herd print. That fabric, and I love that top. I paid £2 a metre for that, and it took 2 metres to make the top. So I had a new top for £4. How brilliant is that? To do some research, fabric is one of those things you can buy super expensive quality blah 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 fabrics, or you can go low end affordable. And these days, because sewing's so popular now, the fabric is absolutely gorgeous. Yes, it's gorgeous. Some of it is anyway. You can get dodgy fabric. Purchasing fabrics online can be a little bit of a journey, a bit of a learning curve. I've got a video talking about this exactly, so do check out that video after this one has ended if you'd like to know more about how to buy fabrics online. Also, another thing when you're buying fabrics, look out for sales. So the next item you are going to need to buy is a tape measure, such as this one here. This is a super long one. I got that because, you know, I'm larger than life, which I didn't actually need. The normal size one fits me just fine. You are going to need something to measure yourself with. Now, you need to measure yourself, but you also may need to measure fabric or patterns or what have you. And if you're keeping your budget super low, then just buy one of these. These do need replacing now and again. Like, I've got some of mine that I've had 5 or 6 years and they have stretched. So this is a fairly new one. Buy these are super cheap. You can get them for £1 or $1 in your Poundland or your dollar store. You can measure everything with this. The thing is, you could get a ruler, but if you get a ruler, you can't measure yourself with a ruler. If you get a measuring tape, then you can measure anything, because it's like really flexible, isn't it? And the next thing you're going to need is a marking tool. Now, my marking tool of choice is a friction pen, just a felt tip, and then you can mark your fabric, and then when you apply heat to it, it disappears. I've tried all the marking tools. You could just get a piece of chalk, which you can buy super cheap in your dollar store or pound store. You could use a washable pen, so when you use it and then you put water on it, it will disappear. I've also got a chalk liner pen, but I like these the best because they're like felt tips. Got loads of colours there. So whatever colour fabric I'm using, I've got a pen that will go with it. Do want to test this on a test piece of fabric before you use it. These are not the cheapest option, but they are my preferred option. So if you want to go cheapest, just get a little triangle of chalk. I think they sell them like the 3 colours, so you've got the red, the blue and the white. That's all you need to use on any fabric, really. But with chalk, what I didn't like was that it dusts away really, really easily. Often by the time I go to sew what I've marked, it's rubbed away and I have to redo it. So I do prefer this, because this is going nowhere until you iron it off. So the next sewing essential that you're going to need is something to hold your fabric together after you've cut it out, when you're getting ready to sew it. And what I use is pins. You can get all sorts of pins. Now, if you're going budget, just go to your local discount store and pick up some basic pins. They're not the best pins in the world, but they will do the job. I bought these off Amazon. I got 500 for about £3 or £4. But just glass head pins with the coloured ball on the end. Pins are something that you're always going to need to replace. If they don't bend or they don't break, then you're going to lose them on the floor. That's why I've got them on this magnetic pincushion. That's not essential. You can just keep them in a box, so that isn't included, but I just thought I'd mention that to you. So the next item you are going to need is something to cut your fabric with. 2 things you can really use to cut your fabric with. That's scissors or a rotary blade. My preferred way is a rotary blade, because I think it leaves less room for errors. However, you don't always want to use a rotary blade. Sometimes it's more appropriate to use scissors. And so if you're going to have a rotary blade, you're going to need both. So I don't recommend the rotary blade. Also, you need a cutting mat as well, and so that isn't happening. You just need some scissors. Now, these were not the cheapest. I paid about £30 for these. You can buy them a lot cheaper than that. My very first pair of scissors were, I can see them now. I don't use these for dressmaking anymore. I use them for decorating. But I bought these in Morrison's, I think it was. I think I paid about £8 for them. And they served me well for years and years. They really did. And probably if I didn't use them for decorating, they'd still work. If I sharpened them, they might still work. To need some scissors for fabric specifically. Otherwise, I would say just use your household scissors. Now, if you are wanting to put patterns together or cut paper, then use your household scissors. Do not use your fabric scissors. But you do want a dedicated pair of fabric scissors that you only cut fabric with. And so that is why I say go to your supermarket. They will have a little sewing section in there, more than likely, and you will be able to buy some scissors in there. So the next item you're going to need is an iron of some kind. I've got this little thing here, a little travel iron, and I use that and it's just good enough. You would have seen this in my bias binding video. An iron is something you potentially do not even need to buy. Most people have an iron in their household and that will be good enough for you to use for sewing. Now I do have a big one, but I don't always like to get it out, partly because it's heavy and I'm a weakling, and also partly because I'm in a really small space and this little thing serves me a lot better. I also have a huge ironing board, but I very, very rarely get that out. I have this ironing board here, so like you can see how small it is. Still quite big, but it's smaller than an ironing board, and I use that with this. I bought this ironing board from IKEA, and I think I paid about £4 for it years and years ago when I first started sewing. Could hang it up on the wall if you want. It's got legs as well, so that's a really handy thing. If you don't own an iron or an ironing board, then you really don't need to buy an ironing board either. You could just use an old towel and then iron on top of an old towel, or just layer some really soft fabric. Wool is a good thing to use for your ironing service because it sends the heat back up to your garment. This little iron I got from Amazon for £20. Anything that I've spoken about that I can find a link for, I will leave an affiliate link down below. That wasn't intentional, that's just something I thought of now. So if you would like to if you'd like to see links of what I've bought, I will try and leave stuff. I don't buy everything from Amazon, and Amazon's the only affiliate link I have. So if I can find what I'm talking about, it'll be down below. So yeah, if you have a big iron, use your big iron, and if you would like a little one like this, these are pretty handy, to be honest. So I've heard a few people say that they use their straightening irons as well. I mean, essentially it's an iron, so why not? If you want to use it, then do go ahead. I can see how that would be quite useful if you're just trying to straighten a hem or maybe a seam. If you're going to buy an iron, the only thing I would say, the only thing is to buy one that's got steam. This has steam, you put the water in there, just because you're going to have a better result with your ironing. I just want to take a quick break to ask you that if you are enjoying this content, you do hit that subscribe button, give me a like and a comment down below, because the YouTube gods absolutely love that, and so do I, and I'll love you forever. The next thing you're going to need, and this is an essential, whether you're brand new to sewing or you've been sewing 50 years, you are going to need one of these, and that is a seam ripper. So this is just a super cheap one. You can buy these in your pound shop. You can get a lot of the essentials for sewing in your pound shop or in your dollar shop. A seam ripper is going to be your friend. You can buy them quite fancy, you can buy them really cheap. This is a cheap plastic one from, I don't know, the Far East, I guess these are made. And it served me absolutely fine. I've got a few of these because they can go blunt after some time. They cost like £1 or $1 and you're good to go. You can buy more expensive ones. You can buy some that are in polymer clay. That's something that I might do a DIY for on my new channel, actually. Make some polymer clay handles for these. That might be quite nice. You're going to have to seam rip and you're going to need one of these. There's not much more to say about it. I've just got one more to share with you, and to be honest, I wasn't sure whether I was going to include this or not. It's not an essential. If you don't know anything about sewing and you're just starting to learn, it can be quite useful, extremely useful in fact, and you can get it for free, and that is sewing patterns. So I've got two here that came free with a magazine, although it's not technically free, is it, because magazines cost a lot of money. But I didn't pay for the magazine because I was featured in the magazine. Your best bet for getting free patterns is online. have a look around online. There is lots and lots of free sewing patterns available. I've got 2 or 3, maybe even 4 videos which are showcasing free patterns. I will leave a playlist for that down below. So with sewing patterns, now I learned with sewing patterns, most people need sewing patterns in order to sew. No, not most people, that's a lie. The sewing pattern community is quite a small one really. Most people who learn to sew don't learn to sew with patterns. They learn to draft their own patterns, or they might learn to trace patterns as well. I've got a video showing how to trace a t-shirt pattern. So I grew up sewing, not grew up, but like my sewing journey in the early days, I used sewing patterns and I spent a small fortune on them. I've probably spent nearly as much on sewing patterns as I have on sewing machines. That is saying something. Maybe not, maybe I'm over exaggerating, but I've probably got about 200 PDF patterns along with all the paper patterns I've bought over the years as well. So I do have a lot, and I've spent a lot of money, and I do wish that I hadn't done that. So I said at the start of the video, at the end I would let you know how much I think it will cost you to buy these essentials at a bargain price altogether, the investment that you need to make. So I came up with a cost of $94 or pounds, really. It's much the same, isn't it? So under £100. So that's not a bad investment. You know, it might be that £94 isn't something that you have available. Certainly I wouldn't have that available right now, but if you have got that available, then it is an affordable cost for doing a hobby that is going to give you years and years of enjoyment. But I hope you enjoyed this video, you liked it, you got some value out of it. If you'd like me to do another similar video talking about maybe the items that are not essential but are complementary, so things that are going to make your life a bit easier. So this was just essentials. If you want to know the things that I've bought that have made my life a little bit easier, because I'm happy to do that video for you, do let me know down below. As always, subscribe, like, do all the things. Check out my Ko-fi account as well if you'd like to show a little bit of extra support, or even my memberships. Until next time, happy sewing. Bye for now.